morning. Good morning. So I heard a saying when I was growing up, and you probably all heard it too, but it's, show me your friends and I'll show you your future. I think we've all heard that, right? Show me your friends and I'll show you your future. And I remember when I first heard that when I was like in late middle school, I just kind of was like, no, you're silly. You don't know what you're talking about. I got things under control. I know where I'm headed. I'm good. But now that I'm older, like that saying is totally true. Like that is absolutely true. And as a kid, I was stupid. I don't know why I thought that was funny, but I mean, it's absolutely true. Because you actually start to become who you spend time with. I think that's so fascinating. I know today, a lot of us are probably happy about the start of the NFL season. Can't wait to go home and watch some football today. But whenever I was growing up, I was a huge Peyton Manning fan. And I know some of you don't like Peyton Manning because you're Chiefs fans, but I'm a huge Peyton Manning fan, even back whenever he played for the Colts. But he was a quarterback in the NFL, and I remember as a kid watching him on TV. And after watching him play, I would go out in the backyard and pretend like I was Peyton Manning. So Peyton Manning had an interesting throwing motion. So like he would throw it more like over his head rather than more like a sidearm throw. So I remember like taking note of that and really just paying attention to how he threw the ball. And so I would go out in the backyard and practice my Peyton Manning throw, make sure I threw it just like him. And it's funny because after like 5, 6, 7, 8 years, like that is not how I throw a football. Because as a little kid, I wanted to be like Peyton Manning so badly that I just ever so carefully wanted to throw just like him, that now, even today, it affects me. I throw like Peyton Manning now because I did as a little kid. And that might be harmless and innocent and kind of irrelevant, but we sometimes copy people. But sometimes, we pick up some bad habits. So I know whenever I was in 8th through 10th grade, I had kind of a hard time with this. I made some bad friends, and they were just horrible people. They were toxic people. I only hung out with these kids because they made me look cool, and I wanted to be a cool kid, so I just naturally spent time with them. But they were nasty. They made fun of everyone. They made fun of each other. But worst of all, they made fun of me. I didn't like that. And so I remember thinking to myself, I had to be very careful how I acted because I didn't want to be made fun of. So every little move that I made was thoroughly thought out because I didn't want them to make fun of me. And so I became hyper aware of these things because I didn't want to do anything stupid. And even though this was like 5 or 6 years ago, it still affects me today. I still have a hard time caring way too much about what other people think about me. And I care way too much about not making a mistake or not looking stupid. These things, it matters. I really believe that we become who we spend time with. My freshman year of college, I started meeting with a professor. His name's Mike. And I started meeting with Mike. I asked him to mentor me. And so we started meeting every Thursday. And so for the past 3 years, we have met every single Thursday. And I think it's probably one of the best decisions I ever made in my life was to meet with this professor, to meet with Mike. And so it's kind of funny, over the last 3 years, my girlfriend Delaney actually pointed this out to me a couple months ago, but like my mannerisms started to match his. So we both kind of use our hands a lot when we talk, and we both kind of communicate in the same way. And I started using like some words that he would use, and it's just hilarious that over the past 3 years, I've picked up on that. And over the past 3 years, I've started to become like Mike. Isn't that crazy? Because you become who you spend time with. Well, today we're covering the 3rd chapter in 1 Corinthians, and so you haven't turned there yet. Go ahead and turn to chapter 3 of 1 Corinthians. And so far, over the last 2 weeks, Paul has just been exploding on the Corinthians. He has just been letting them have it. He's telling them how it is, and he's scolding them like they're little kids. And chapter 3 is no different. Chapter 3 is kind of the end of this part of Paul kind of scolding them and yelling at them. That's kind of what it seems like. So chapter 1, 2, and 3, kind of 3 is the last of that, even though overall the whole book he kind of does the same thing. But the Corinthians claim to be Christians, but they're not acting right. They don't yet have the mind of Christ. So let's read verses 1 through 4. And I think the opening to this chapter is kind of funny, but let's read it. He says, "Brothers, I could not address you as spiritual, but as worldly, mere infants in Christ. I gave you milk, not solid food, for you were not yet ready for it. Indeed, you are still not ready. You are still worldly. For since there is jealousy and quarreling among you, are you not worldly? Are you not acting like mere men? For when one says, I follow Paul, and another, I follow Apollos, are you not mere men?" Paul is essentially asking the Corinthians, Why are you acting like a person? Why are you acting like a person? That's basically what it translates to. And you know what? Like this morning, I want to tell you, I have a hard time not acting like a person. I have a hard time with that. I have a hard time not acting like a person. But it's hard to understand what Paul means by this. Let's look at verse 4 again. Verse 4, he says, "For when one says, I follow Paul, and another, I follow Apollos, are you not mere men?" As Christians, we're called to a higher standard. We don't live with the same values as the people in the world. Christians live in step with the Spirit. Christians listen to the Spirit. Like we talked about last week, letting the Spirit work, because it's the Spirit at work and not actually us. But the Corinthians aren't doing this. They're connecting themselves. They're not connecting to themselves to the Spirit. They're connecting themselves to other people. They're connecting themselves to Paul and Apollos and Peter, not the Spirit. The Corinthians are being envious with one another and over who they follow. And Paul says, Christians don't act like that. People act like that. You're acting like a person. That's what he means. If you have envy, you're acting like a person of this world. Envy is out of step with the Spirit. Envy is out of step with the Word of God. Now think about what I said earlier. You become who you spend time with. Now I said I met regularly with Mike, and I still do. Is the ultimate goal for Mike and I to meet, for me to become like Mike? Well, I hope not. Ultimately, my goal is to become like Jesus. So if I'm set on becoming like Mike, that's a problem. That's a problem. I need to set my trajectory to become more like Jesus. That's important. And so the Corinthians are only following their mentors. They're completely misunderstanding this. So my order of priority should be Jesus number one, and then Mike. But the Corinthians are flipping this, and they're going Paul, Apollos, or Peter, and then Jesus. They're flipping these. Because I think who you spend time with and who you're following will set the trajectory for your life. And we kind of talked about this a little bit in Sunday school last week. The distance between the moon and the earth is 238,900 miles. That's a long time. That's a long distance. And when NASA sent a spaceship up to the moon, they needed a precise calculation. If they were off just by a little bit, they would miss the moon completely and go off some other universe like crazy far, just off by one number. That's how important it is to set your trajectory. Make sure you're following Jesus and not something else. Make sure your trajectory is set on the right path. And this can be hard in today's world with influencers on the internet and everyone going around trying to be important and create a YouTube channel and try to become famous. Like everyone's trying to do this right now. I think it's interesting what Paul has to say next in verse 5. He says this in verse 5. What, after all, is Apollos? And what is Paul? Only servants, through whom you came to believe as the Lord has assigned to each his task. Apollos and Paul are servants. They get their strength from the Spirit. Paul's kind of like, you want to go and follow them? You want to go and be like them? All of the Corinthians are trying so hard to be just like their mentors. And Paul goes, you want to be like them? Follow the Spirit, because that's who they're following. This makes no sense for you to follow them whenever they're following the Spirit. You should just follow the Spirit yourself. Let's keep reading in verse 6. I planted the seed, Apollos watered it, but God made it grow. So neither he who plants nor he who waters is anything, but only God, who makes things grow. The man who plants and the man who waters have one purpose, and each will be rewarded according to his own labor. For we are God's fellow workers. You are God's field, God's building. When we farm or do any kind of gardening, we don't do the hard work. Nature does. Nature does the hard work. I think you guys know this better than anyone. I remember when I first started coming here and I noticed that you guys prayed for rain, or you thank God for rain. And I just thought that was bizarre at first. But now I understand why you pray for rain. It makes sense. I had always thought of rain as kind of a negative thing. Like, oh, I hate the rain. I don't want to get wet. But here it makes sense. In a farming community, rain is everything. Farming takes a lot of strength to rely on something outside of yourself. It takes a lot of strength. You can't really look at the plants that you grew and be proud of it because you didn't actually do the work. It was the rain that did it. It was the rain and nature that did all the work. The Spirit works in the same way. It's not really you doing any of the work. It's the Spirit. You can't say, well, look at how many people I've baptized, or well, look at all these people I'm bringing to church, look at all these people I'm bringing to Christ. Because it's not you, it's the Spirit that's doing that. So it's kind of silly to brag about stuff like that. It's God that plants the seed, and you and I only water it, and God makes it grow. So these 3 weeks, these first 3 chapters in 1 Corinthians go together so well. Week 1 was all about how we're not important. It's not about me. So get out of the way and let God do the work. And then last week it's the Spirit that's at work. It's not actually us. It's the Spirit. And today, we need to focus on, are you helping the Spirit work, or are you hindering it? Are you helping the Spirit or hindering it? Verse 8 tells us that God rewards each to his own labor. We need to be faithful to our own journey. We can't compare it with other people. It's stupid to compare, because ultimately, remember, it's God doing the work. It's the Spirit doing the work. It's not you or me. You see this a lot with mega churches or huge churches in cities. Last year I went to New York City and went and visited a church called Hillsong. You've probably heard of Hillsong because they've written a lot of worship music. But it's basically its own denomination of church. And there are these huge churches that are basically like concerts because it's so focused on the worship part. But, I mean, these Hillsong churches are huge. In the place that I went to right in downtown New York, it was probably 5,000 or 6,000 people that were there. In this venue, there were balconies on the sides, and there was like 4 tiers of seats. Like, it was ginormous. And it was an experience. But there's competition in the church to have the biggest, the coolest, the most relevant church. But in the end, isn't that silly? People compete and compare over who has the biggest church, who has the most people in their church. But that's silly, because it's not us that does the work, it's the Spirit. It's God. Because in the end, Hillsong in New York City is no more important than Madison, Central Christian Church in Madison, Kansas. Let's make sure we're not hindering the work of the Spirit, but facilitating it. Let's make sure we're not pointing people to ourselves, but towards God. Let's keep reading in verse 10. By the grace God has given me, I laid a foundation as an expert builder, and someone else is building on it. But each one should be careful how he builds. For no one can lay any foundation other than the one already laid, which is Jesus Christ. If any man builds on this foundation using gold, silver, costly stones, wood, hay, or straw, his work will be shown for what it is, because the day will bring it to light. It will be revealed with fire, and the fire will test the quality of each man's work. If what he has built survives, he will receive his reward. If it is burned up, he will suffer loss. He himself will be saved, but only as one escaping through the flames. Don't you know that you yourselves are God's temple, and that God's Spirit lives in you? If anyone destroys God's temple, God will destroy him, for God's temple is sacred, and you are that temple. So this is when Paul gets real. Paul is basically saying the work that you complete will be judged by God in the end. He says we can build with gold, silver, or costly stones, or we can build with wood, hay, or straw. And it's interesting that he says that it will be tested with fire, because the fire will be tested, the fire will test the quality of your work. If you notice the things that he's comparing, he compares gold and silver and costly stones to wood and hay and straw. Which do you think is more flammable? Obviously the second. What is your work made out of? Gold and silver and marble, or wood and straw? Basically, Paul is telling the Corinthians to stay focused. Make sure you're staying on the right path. You could live to be 100 years old, but waste your time. Or you could live to be 30 and make an eternal impact. It's your choice. Use your time wisely. Well, we're all contributing to the one building of Christ, trying to find uniqueness by following Paul or Apollos or Peter is a waste of time. You're straying away from the vision. Follow Christ and stay focused. Let's finish the chapter, verse 18. Do not deceive yourselves. If any one of you thinks he is wise by the standards of this age, he should become a fool, so that he may become wise. For the wisdom of this world is foolishness in God's sight. As it is written, he catches the wise in their craftiness, and again the Lord knows that the thoughts of the wise are futile. So then no more boasting about men. All things are yours, whether Paul or Apollos or Cephas, or the world or life or death or the present or the future, all are yours. seen this all over 1 Corinthians. These past 3 weeks, we've seen a ton of this. We've seen this word foolishness so many times. This whole concept of how the wisdom of the world is foolishness in God's sight. So what I want to ask you is, who are you running with? Are you running with the world? Or are you running with God? Whose opinion do you care more about? The truth of the matter is, to be a Christian, you have to be okay with looking like a fool in the eyes of the world. Because our message is foolishness. If you care more about impressing people with your intelligence or trying to be relevant than to share the foolish message of the gospel, then this isn't for you. The gospel is foolishness, and I'm not ashamed of it, is what Paul says. We believe that Jesus Christ is the Son of God. We believe that Jesus Christ came down and lived a perfect and sinless life. We believe that Jesus is the fulfillment of the Old Testament. We believe that Jesus was tortured and was put to death. He was crucified by Pontius Pilate. And we believe that 3 days later, he rose from the dead. That's the message that we believe. And the world says, oh, Jesus, he was just this cool teacher. Like, he was just really good at teaching. He was just really charismatic, influential guy, but that's about it. Or you know what? I mean, the Bible, it's just kind of this old book. It's not really the Word of God, It's just kind of, over time, people just kind of start compiling these things, and that's about it. Or Jesus didn't really rise from the dead. They just kind of made that up like years later, hundreds of years later. That's just kind of how that works. He's not really the Son of God. Our message is foolishness to the world. Paul said in chapter 1, he says this, the message of the cross is foolishness to those who are perishing. But to us who are being saved, it is the power of God. Corinth back in the first century was very similar to modern day New York or Los Angeles or San Francisco. People are running around trying to network and promote themselves and trying to be important and significant. People are trying to one-up each other, climb the social ladder, make more money, gain a bigger following. You want to know a secret though? All these people running around, freaking out, trying to gain a following, they make it seem like they've got life figured out. But you know what? They don't. They don't. Because the truth of the matter is, everyone's running around trying to find contentment. They're all trying to find safety. They're trying to find meaning. They're grasping for it. Maybe enough money will make me secure. Maybe fame will do the trick. It's all a waste of time. The way of the world is ruthlessly chasing after and striving after contentment and comfort. And they're not going to find it. But the way of Jesus is not to ruthlessly chase, but to rest. It's to rest. When you enter into Christ, the desire to be significant dissipates, and you live in that peace. Matthew 11 says this, come to me, all who are weary and burdened. This is Jesus saying this. And I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me. For I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy, and my burden is light. The world says run, chase after ruthlessly. But Jesus says rest, have peace. The message of Jesus is foolishness to those who are worldly. You guys know I interned at a church in Ventura, California this summer. I got to know the staff pretty well. I got to know the pastors there. And got to know their stories and how they got there, how they ended up as pastors, and how they lived in Ventura. The executive pastor, his name is Jim. I really got to get to know Jim pretty well and got to know his story and more about how he got to become a pastor. And he's got such a cool story. I really loved spending time with Jim. But Jim, he didn't go to college. Jim didn't go to college. But he decided that hard work could get you anywhere, which I think is a good lesson. But he believed that hard work could get you anywhere, so he started working at a bank as a teller. Literally the bottom of the line, like he was at the bottom of the chain, working as a teller at this bank. But he believed that hard work could get you anywhere, so he started working hard. He worked his butt off, and he slowly started to get promoted, started to get a raise. And he slowly worked his way up. Pretty soon after 2 years, he was the manager of this bank. And he was doing great. And then after several more years, he actually got promoted to corporate. He worked in corporate. Pretty soon, he was in one of the top 10 positions of this organization, of this corporation. He was in a top 10 position. Without a college degree, also. That's a huge deal. People don't do that. And And so he told me that once he made it to corporate, he made it his goal, he made it his vision to make it to vice president, right below the CEO. That was his goal. And so he said he worked ruthlessly to try to make it up there. He said he was fantastic at schmoozing his coworkers and the people above him. He said he would take them out to drink almost every night. He would stay up till 1 or 2 in the morning every night trying to make sure everyone liked him. He said his marriage fell apart because all he did was work. He worked 60, 80-hour work weeks because all he had focused on was making that promotion. And after 15 years, he finally got that promotion. He made it from teller to vice president of this bank corporation with no college degree. That's crazy. He made it to vice president. And he told me about that day. He moved into his new office, and he sat there in his desk with this awesome view of the city. And he unboxed his new business cards, and it read, Jim Sheldon, vice president. And he said he read that, and he started to cry. He said, is this it? Is this what I worked 15 years for? Is this what I destroyed my marriage for? Is this what I played all of these people who think that I'm their friend, but I really don't like them at all? Did I do all of this for this title? This is nothing. And he said he quit his job. Right there. Once he got the promotion, he quit. And he became a pastor. And he moved to Ventura, California to plant this church, which he's at now. Isn't that crazy? Jim said he realized what Jesus meant by saying, my yoke is easy, my burden is light. Jim chased ruthlessly for 15 years for contentment, when real contentment was offered to him the whole time, and all he had to do was accept it. He didn't have to chase after it. Jim Sheldon was a success in the eyes of the world. Anyone would love to have that story. But in the eyes of God, he was a failure. What direction is your life headed? Are you resting or are you chasing? Are you trying to be important? Are you trying to be significant in the eyes of the world? Because Jesus did. Jesus was this nobody Jewish guy in the corner of the Roman Empire from Nazareth. Nobody thought anything good could come from Nazareth. He came and all he did was disciple these 12 guys, this mixture of fishermen and tax collectors and absolute nobodies. And he ended up crucified on a cross, a failure by any measure of success. He died, was crucified and tortured. He was a failure in the eyes of the world, but in the eyes of God, he's the hope for salvation. So are you running with the world or are you running with Jesus? Because ultimately you have to come to the end of yourself and realize that no matter how hard you chase, no matter how far you go, you're not going to be able to save yourself. You have to let Jesus take control. You have to let Jesus save you. Who are you worshiping? Because that will determine the trajectory that your life is headed. Because who you spend time with is who you become. Are you spending time with Jesus or not? Let's pray. God, thank you so much for sending your Son. Thank you so much that we can rest in him. Thank you that we don't have to ruthlessly chase after things that we think are going to give us contentment but never will. Lord, help us to rest and be content in your Spirit. Lord, help us to help the Spirit that's at work. Help us to help you, not hinder you. Lord, thank you for this church. Thank you for this community. I pray that we would all rest in the gospel. That we would all go out and facilitate the Spirit and not hinder it. Lord, thank you for today. Thank you for this church. In your name I pray.